All right. Well, that takes us through Catherine Wheel, and we
Hmm.
are now on album number two. And Josh, I will give you the first take here. Pearl Jam, No Code.
Yeah. So this is their follow up after Vitalogy, which we talked about previously. I didn't look up the episode,
Kind
but
of
I
the
can.
beginning of Pearl Jam moving from like huge band to like certainly not a niche band, but like off the radar a little bit, I think, for
Yeah, and
sure.
this
Hmm.
is an album I had not heard before. As of as
Really?
yeah, as you know, most
Wow.
coming
Okay.
to Pearl Jam relatively new, um, other than knowing kind of their big hits. So we're going in order with them, and yeah, I was positive on this album. It definitely feels like a deviation from their previous albums. It feels a bit more. Um, there feels like a bit more variety. Like they're trying a lot of different things in the throughout the albums and different tracks, kind of stretching themselves maybe, or at least like um, just trying things they're interested in more than kind of sticking to a formula. And I think that's what we've kind of been saying about Pearl Jam, right? Is that they didn't want to be hemmed in by this kind of
Hmm.
um, grunge
And
label. And
Vitalogy, they did it too. They
right,
they started throwing in curveballs, and people didn't know kind of what to make of that after two albums where it was kind of straight ahead
hmm,
grunge, right? Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so they're continuing the trend here. I think Eddie Vedder, continues to impress me throughout this album. His voice is just so powerful, but also nimble, and the way he uses it with the different songs. Sometimes, which is the opening track, is such an interesting way to start the album. It sounds so production wise, it sounds like so close and intimate. Like his vocals are real up front, and it feels like he's singing right to you. There's no kind of big chorus. There is guitar and drums and some backing stuff, but it feels stripped down, and it doesn't feel like a big like opening statement. It's almost like an anti-opening statement, like saying like this is
Hmm.
an album that, like, that we're doing something different on. Like it's gonna maybe be more stripped down in a way or something like that. Um, so I thought that was really interesting. But then they go right into like Hail Hail, which is definitely more of like a rock song. There's more of a tempo to it. There's him hitting kind of the more traditional beats. So that's like a reminder that we haven't left our kind of core identity completely, but but they're just I just appreciate kind of like the flexibility the band is showing at this point on their albums. They seem to be incorporating in the next two tracks like more kind of like driving percussion as a way of like foundation to the song. I saw a mention of like world beat, but I
I
don't.
was gonna say it's like world music. Who you are,
Yeah, like there is like
and
some
in my
kind of
tree, yeah.
African tones,
Hmm.
or like African drumming type of sound. It's just like kind of like one drum, almost like a bongo
Yeah.
or something. Um,
I yeah, I always kind of said like, this is like Pearl Jam trying out genres that you would
mhm.
never think Pearl Jam would do, right? And tracks three and four are like Pearl Jam doing world music.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And then they go into blues with Smile, and they got the
Or Neil Young is what
yes,
they do with Smile. I mean, that's a
yep.
Neil Young song based,
Hmm.
not literally, but it could be, right?
Yeah, and so that continues throughout the album. This is a this album is not too long as well. The I think it seems like they had multiple singles on here. I recognized like multiple songs, but
Yeah,
present
Hail Hail
tense,
was a single.
yeah,
Hmm.
present tense seemed to
Red
be
Mosquito.
their most recognizable song to me on
It
this
has
album.
to be. It has to be in a like
A
Netflix
movie or
show
something.
because it was not a single when it came out.
Okay, I didn't
Yeah.
look it up, but that one, like, I had heard that one. That one, like, rose to the top in terms of songs I recognized.
Oh, you'd
Um,
heard that one.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's what for me it's one of the most obscure songs on this album,
interesting.
but I'm like it's got by far the most views, so my first thought was, "Oh, it must have been in something."
Yeah,
So,
I'll have to look that up when you're talking. But yeah, I like that song too because Vedder's voice is great. It's just I appreciate the, like I said, the variety on this album, the way that they're able to move in and out effortlessly, and And I'm not, I wasn't. I don't want to define Pearl Jam by their first two albums. I don't feel like the need to only like their first two albums, right? I kind of like the fact that going on the journey, kind of we have with all these other bands that we've discovered, but out of context for the time period, they're just a really solid band, and I can see why they have kind of a dedicated fan base for those people who stuck with them past the first two albums. So this was a thumbs up for me this week.
Yeah, I've always liked this album. I liked this when I first got it. And I definitely, though, can remember friends of mine who were Pearl Jam partisans, even more so than me. It was one of these things where, I mean, there's the people that have loved Pearl Jam for forever, right? So I have friends who have been Pearl Jam heads forever, right? It's like their band. Totally get it.
Right.
But I had a lot of friends who really liked Pearl Jam, and then Vitalogy was a little bit too heavy for them, and then No Code was where they sort of jumped off a little bit, because this is sort of an anti As You Imagine Pearl Jam album, right? And this is more like Pearl Jam playing stuff that shows their versatility and wearing some of their influences on their sleeve. It was also, and I know you weren't really listening to them, you said, Josh, but it was an interesting time to be a Pearl Jam fan at this time, because this was like right when they were doing that whole Ticketmaster thing. So they were this really big band who was almost impossible to see. And so it was kind of like, I can remember going to see them at this point, and it was you had to call a number to get because they weren't going through Ticketmaster, right? Like that was their thing. They were trying to fight Ticketmaster. So they had to, and this was like back in the day, right? So there weren't easy ways to go around, Ticketmaster and do big shows, right? Like, yeah, if you were like a hardcore band, right? Or like a ska or a punk band or like some local band, sure, show up at the, will call. But Pearl Jam wasn't going to be playing shows that had a will call, right? You know what I mean? They're going to be playing big arenas. So it was unwieldy. It almost felt like they sabotaged their career by design as a big act, right? Like there's like an alternate universe, right? Where like Pearl Jam becomes the Foo Fighters of like their era, where they just keep releasing big hits because they basically can, right? That type of song. You feel like Pearl Jam could have written songs that sound like 10 in verses the rest of their life and just would have a never-ending wellspring of them, right? But no, instead they did Vitalogy, and you get Corduroy and a song like Corduroy, Spin the Black Circle, right? That are going in completely different directions. Like, yeah, maybe Better Man sounds a little bit like 10 in verses, right? But they're clearly showing they want to rock out a little bit more. And this one is a mix of ballads, right? That's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Pearl Jam ballad, Off He Goes, which is a really pretty song. It ends with Around the Bend. Present Tense is a ballad, right? Along the way. You get like Pearl Jam doing hardcore in Lucan, right?
Yes.
Which is 1 minute of them basically doing a hardcore song.
Which I liked too.
Yeah. Red Mosquito is this really jammy, like drugged out, like sort of jam band type sound along the way. Hail Hail is just a really good straight ahead rock song. This album has some of my favorite Pearl Jam songs, like Hail Hail, Off He Goes, Red Mosquito are 3 of my favorite Pearl Jam songs, always have been. And then like the world music block of Who You Are and In My Tree. I think you're 1,000% right, Josh. Sometimes is a really interesting way to start the album. It almost feels like they're sedating you before they like blow off the doors with Hail Hail. So it makes Hail Hail sound like an even harder song than it is, because sometimes it's so, lower tempo. Smiles, Neil Young, for sure. Without a doubt, that's a Neil Young song. Habit's an interesting one. It's almost like a garage rock song, but once again in an unmistakably Pearl Jam style. So the eclecticism on this really hits with me. I think it was a great way to transition Pearl Jam away from being niched. It really was on brand for what we now know of Pearl Jam. At the time when it was happening, it was kind of confusing to a lot of their fans. I think even for me, I was 16 when this album dropped. It was a little bit confusing to me, like, I wonder why they're deciding to release this album. I dig it, but I don't think this is going to be popular. And then, the feedback from friends of mine started coming in who were what I would call more mainstream rock fans. These were not my friends listening to indie rock or part of a, like a sub scene like punk or ska, right? You know what I mean? Like these were guys that were like listening to alt rock radio, probably where like kind of like Matt describes himself in high school, right? You know what I mean? Like I'm listening to the local alt rock channel. Now I know Matt likes this album quite a bit. It's a shame he's not here this week because I'd be very curious to hear what he thought of this album when it came out, if it hit his ears, like, oh, this isn't the Pearl Jam I want, or if Vitalogy had kind of already conditioned him, right, to think that Pearl Jam was already moving in a different direction. So yeah, so just a little bit of context there, Josh, in terms of how this album hit. But yeah, this is a strong thumbs up for me. I really like this. This is one of my favorite Pearl Jam albums. I'll go so far as to say I might like the combination of Vitalogy and No Code a little bit more than I like the combination of 10 and Versus in terms of as time has gone on.
Yeah.
I find myself revisiting those albums more than I do 10 and Versus. And don't get me wrong, I really like those albums, but they feel of a time, right? Where
I was just about to say, yeah.
Yeah, where Vitalogy and No Code don't, right?
Yep.
They feel a little bit more flexible because they reference stuff of the past, of the present, and they have
and the sound isn't so tied to the 90s like
Correct.
grunge. Yep.
Exactly.
So this song just appeared on The Last of Us a few episodes ago. So
Okay.
at the end
There you
credits, that's probably why
Yep.
it's popular. I had forgotten about that. It also appeared on the end of the last episode, The Last Dance, the Michael Jordan documentary.
There you go again.
10 part.
Yep.
So that's probably
Yes.
why it's recognizable.
Yeah, it's not that it's a great song, but like it was never a song you heard on
Yeah.
the radio. Like the singles on this were Hail Hail. It was definitely the first one I remember. Red Mosquito
Yep.
was on the radio, and then I think Off He Goes was a single
Yes.
too, if
Yeah.
I remember correctly. Yeah, so those are the three I remember hearing on the radio. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm
right.
excited to hear what the next Pearl Jam album when we get to it.
Yeah, we're covering Yield, so we're gonna cover that one. And that's I believe their last one in the 90s, if I remember correctly. I think it's Yield, and then I think it might be their self-titled after that. I know they take a break for a while. Or no, Binaural, right?
Yep.
Binaural. And
Binaural's
Riot
2000.
Act. And Riot Act, right? Isn't that one?
Yep, 2002.
Yeah, and then it's the self-titled, right?
Yes, you got it.
Let's see how far I can go. Then Backspacer.
Yep, 2009.
Okay, and then that's it. That's where it runs out for me. I don't know the other ones. Yeah.
Then there's a live album, Live on
Yeah.
10 Legs, and Pearl Jam 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is Pearl Jam has one of the best like B-sides collections. I think it's called Lost Dogs. There's a lot of tracks on that you're like, how the hell did this not make it onto a Pearl Jam album? It's a really, really strong like B-sides disc. I'd strongly recommend it.
That came out in 2003, it looks like.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's all of like the songs that didn't get on the first 6 albums, I think. And there are definitely things that, because they tell you what album it would have been on, and you're like, wow, how did this not make it on that specific album? Especially when you're talking about Binaural and Riot Act, right? You're just kind of like, Yield, you're like, I'm kind of shocked this didn't make it on there. And also, I believe they stuck like Yellow Ledbetter on there as well, which had never been on any album. So that's like a bonus.
Was that a song like they play live but wasn't on an album or something?
No, it was like they have that. So Pearl Jam has that one, and then they have that Last Kiss cover, right? That are affiliated with like their fan club, and they send out a single to their fan club. Both of those songs were like in that lane, like basically not affiliated with a soundtrack or an album. It was just like a song they recorded. And, I know Last Kiss was their fan club. I think Yellow Ledbetter was something like that, like just a B-side that became a cult favorite.
Gotcha.
It was weird though, because it was being played on the radio, like contemporarily, like so you'd think it would be on an album, but it was like, nope, it's the only time you heard this was on the radio.
Interesting. I guess it was on the Jeremy single as like a B-side too. That's what
it's
it
like.
says?
As I said, it's like a B-side
Yeah.
that just started getting played, but then they never put it on an album. So when you went to go look for it, like I could definitely remember people saying, what album's Yellow Ledbetter on? It's like none of them. They're like, really? Like it's just, what? So they're like, and then people would say like, is it on a soundtrack? It's like, no, it's not on a soundtrack either. So it's like, what the hell?
Back when the time there was no way to get the song.
And that's what I'm saying. So it was like kind of like, oh shit, you had to find like the single, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was like later, right, that it kind of got radio airplay. I remember that getting played around the time that like Vitalogy was out, and
Hmm.
so it's on the back of Jeremy's. That's 2 albums before it, right? So there's
Yep.
not a lot of like Jeremy singles, or albums, CD
Interesting.
singles going out. So
Yeah. Cool.
yeah, but Pearl Jam heads, feel free to jump in the comments if there's anything else we should know about Yellow Ledbetter. But yeah, I have always been a fan of No Code, and it was a cool album too. Like it had like inserted like pictures and stuff in it. The front's like a collage of pictures, and then inside there were sort of other pictures and album notes. Like Pearl Jam at this time was, they definitely were a band that felt like they cared about their fans. Fighting Ticketmaster, kind of giving you extras if you bought the album and stuff. It did feel like that a little bit. And I think that's where some of the devotion comes from to them too.
Yeah. No, I can understand why they'd have a kind of dedicated fan base as well.